Welcome to the Tales of a Red Clay Rambler podcast, featuring interviews with culture makers from around the world. This is Ben Carter. I'm going to be your host. If you'd like more information on the show, please visit our website, talesofaredclayrambler.com. Welcome back to episode 380 of the podcast. Thank you guys for tuning in. Today on the show, I talk with Sarah Pike about her hand-built vessels. She works with bent soft slabs and creates a wonderful angularity that is reminiscent of tinware and other metal objects that she draws influence from. In our interview, we talk about redeveloping a sense of touch after taking a hiatus to raise children, as well as building a bustling online business from her home in Fernie, British Columbia. To see examples of her work, you can visit sarahpikepottery.com. On today's Amico Community Corkboard, we have a GoFundMe campaign in support of Kent McLaughlin. After a recent cancer diagnosis, Kent and his wife Susie Lindsay need our support to help to pay for medical expenses. They've been staples of the Western North Carolina ceramic community for many decades, and when I was a student at Appalachian State, I looked up to them both as being examples of how you can make a living making pottery. You can make a donation at gofundme.com and search for Kent McLaughlin. Before we get to this interview, I wanted to thank the folks that donated to our spring fund drive. We are listener-supported, so I'd like to thank Linda Arbuckle and Suzanne Ritchie for their recent contributions. If you'd like to get involved yourself, you can do so at the website. That's talesofaredclayrambler.com/donate. Without further ado, we'll get to the interview. Let's start by having you explain where you live in Fernie, British Columbia.
So Fernie is a small town. It's in the Ktunaxa territory, and it's in the southeast corner of British Columbia, Canada, in the Rocky Mountains. It's a ski town. There's about 5,000 people here and a really big ski resort. And it's known for its legendary powder, is the quote unquote reason people come here to ski. We also have a lot of mountain bike trails, and my husband's a fly fishing guide. He guides on the river in the summer, and it's kind of an outdoor lifestyle town.
It sounds very similar to Helena, Montana, where the Archie Bray is, where I was looking at pictures of Fernie and you can just see mountains everywhere. It's the same in Helena.
Yeah, there's definitely some similarities between some of the towns in Montana, because they're just south of us, right? We can go to Whitefish, Montana. It's 2 hours south drive from here. My son used to play hockey with them, so we used to go down to Whitefish all the time, which is another well-known ski hill. So there's similar geography. I feel like here we get a little bit more precipitation than Helena, less pines, more cedars, and heavy snowfalls and rainfalls. It's raining right now. It's a dark, rainy day right now.
How did you guys come to live in Fernie?
Well, we used to live on a farm northwest of Calgary, and we decided that we were going to change our lifestyle. And Sebastian, my husband, he had always been a fly fishing guide on the river up there. And we both loved to, at the time, snowboard. And this town is only 3.5 hours from Calgary. So we would still be close to our family, but coming back to BC where I grew up was a thing I wanted to do. And he could still guide here. So it was sort of like a stepping stone into a new life, leaving a career and starting a new one. He could guide here. So that would sort of soften the blow of what are we going to do for the rest of our lives. And so we moved here in 2010. So we've been here 11 years now, this month actually.
My brother just opened a fly fishing shop on Monday in Virginia.
What? No way.
Yeah.
Wow.
He was a guide in Colorado and in North Carolina, and then has bounced around a bunch and is now opening a shop in our hometown of Salem, Virginia, which is this super small town.
So there's good fly fishing in Virginia.
There is, yeah. Well, there is fly fishing in Virginia. I don't know how it compares to mountain streams. I mean, when he lived in Colorado, the way he described it was just amazing. It's like you have to, I think he would actually even fish with a gun because there were enough grizzly bears that you had to just be very aware of what was happening at all times.
Right. I don't think Sebastian's run into too many bears, but we were mountain biking last week and we ran into a grizzly. So they're definitely around.
Wow. What did you do?
Oh, so Sebastian, I was with Sebastian and a couple friends, and he was ahead. We were coming down, so that's the time when you run into them because you're going so fast, right? You're making a lot of noise, but still, you come around a corner, and it was a little ways ahead, and it was running full tilt because it heard us coming. We were making noise and running along the trail, and Sebastian just stopped. We got our bear spray ready, looking for cubs, feeling a little scared and sort of assessing the situation, making a lot of noise, and it took off into the trees, and we just waited a few minutes and then made a whole bunch more noise and kept going. But yeah, it was, yeah, I don't know, a friend said that for every one time you see a grizzly, there's probably 100 times you didn't see it, that it saw you. So yes, there was, and actually there's a guy I know who, I didn't know him well. We used to hang out a little bit, but he was just killed by a grizzly a couple of weeks ago. Up near Calgary. Like it definitely is a danger, right? They are something that scares me. Fat biking is something that's got really popular recently, and I kind of like that idea because going in the winter when the bears are sleeping, it just feels a little safer.
In Helena, when I lived there, it was elk. I mean, you would occasionally see bears, but moose are very dangerous.
Yeah, Sebastian got charged by a moose a couple of years ago. He had to lift his bike up and use it as a shield because this moose was right up on top of him. Yeah.
He has horrible animal luck. Does he just find these everywhere?
Yeah, if you're here, don't go out with him. Just kidding. He just is out there a lot, right? So you're going to run into it. But yeah, it's true. I should think about that. Stay away from him.
What I feel like so much of our lives is interior, like when we're working in the studio, we kind of hole up in our little art cave. So it's nice to know that you have an outside life of biking and snowboarding or hiking, whatever, that is a balance to that. Do you feel the need, do you work a whole bunch for a sale and then go outside more after your sales? Or what's your rhythm of getting outside to have life balance?
That's a good question because that balance thing is really hard, isn't it? It's so hard. I know that you spend a lot of time looking after your body, like health wise, right? Stretching and strengthening. And I've had a few injuries in the past year, and it's super important for me. Like I work out a couple of times a week, and I try and mountain bike every day or every other day through the summer. And then in the winter, I don't snowboard anymore. I'm more of a cross country skier for the same reason. I just really want that cardio and strength, and I can take the dog, and it's like an hour, right? So I'll spend my say lunch hour doing something like that because it is an hour or an hour and a half, and it brings so much back to the studio. Like the endorphins for one, mental health, but also just being out in this beautiful environment also is so inspiring to come back to the studio. So I really try and make the time to do that. But yeah, if there is a crunch, it's not always easy to fit it in.
When you moved from Calgary or that area up to where you are now, do you feel like that affected your work? Like, do you draw from the nature around you and the patterns that you make on pots?
I think it does. I think I do. When we lived on the farm, though, I have had kind of a sort of convoluted story in clay. I didn't work a lot in clay then. I had two small children, and my husband and I ran a ranch with 150 cows. So we homeschooled. So
Wow.
we were pretty consumed with that life. I tried to, before I had my daughter, there was 3 years space between them. I did continue, because I got pregnant with my first in grad school, came back to the farm and tried to continue making pots. And then we decided, yes, we would have another child, and that number two, suddenly it was like, whew, I cannot fit clay into this lifestyle. So I'm going to fully embrace what we're doing. We decided we'd give it a 5-year window, because it wasn't my life choice to be a ranch wife. And I just kind of given up this career of going to grad school. And I thought, you know what, if this is what you want to do and we're in this together, to my husband, let's commit to 5 years and give it 100%. And at the end of 5 years, if it worked, we'll look at the next 5 years. And if it's not working, let's make a change. And at the end of 5 years, we decided, you know what, this is maybe not the lifestyle we want to raise children in. And Sebastian says now, I've heard him say to friends, like he could see that a part of me was dying inside because it wasn't making, like I think like a lot of us who make things, if we're not making, we feel not complete, right? So yeah, it was a choice, a lifestyle choice to move to Fernie. And but yeah, I wasn't making pots very much when we were on the farm, so I can't say that it influenced me a ton. There was a period where I was teaching classes. I had a little studio built into our barn. I was teaching classes there, but I was mostly filling my kilns with student work, not my own work.
I think with ranching, it's an anchor that holds you to a place. Like I have friends and family that are farmers, and then their ranches are way smaller, like maybe 10 cattle and that's it. But even that, like they don't ever travel far. They rarely take vacations. Like you're kind of tied to that place, which is hard for an artist who needs stimulation.
Yes, you are completely tied to. You're looking after, like these animals are in your care, so you have to pretty much be there, or one person can leave, but you can't take the whole family away. It's not very easy to find someone to run your ranch for a week or two. It was all consuming for sure.
With the homeschooling that you did with your kids, like people now understand homeschooling because of COVID. And I think because of that, everyone's like, oh my God, thank you to the teachers that do this, because it's way harder than it seems. So how did you develop in that time? Like, how did you know what you wanted to cover with the kids when you were intentionally homeschooling, not COVID homeschooling?
Well, the kids were young, which I think, there's a little less pressure. It's not like you're teaching calculus or something. But we really liked the idea of focusing our school curriculum on the lifestyle that we were living. So the natural seasonal rhythms of the farm. It just made more sense. Like, it's like, okay, we're camping right now, so we're going to learn about birth and life cycles, and we're planting the garden now, so we're going to learn about those things. Like we used unschooling as our method. So basically, whatever the children were interested in, or how our life was actually, what part of our life we were focused on at that point, became the curriculum. And you could kind of fit everything into that, like Julian, he was super into cooking when he was little, like he was 6 or 7. He wanted to cook all the time. So there's so much math in that, with all the, quarter cup and all this stuff, and how it all adds up, that we were able to, it's like, okay, well, we just learned about that. We learned about cooking. And then he made a little cookbook. So he learned about, a bit about graphic design, and he was super into dinosaurs. So it was pretty cool, because I learned, a ton as well, but it was focused on what he was interested in, and also where our life was at the time. And in Alberta, it's quite I don't know if it's like how common this is, but there is an unschooling school essentially there. So you can have a facilitator, and they're sort of the liaison with the government. So they would come and sit with us, sort of interview us and the kids, and look at all the things that the kids have been working on, and write a little assessment and say, yeah, they're totally on a good path here. So we'd get a little bit of funding towards books and materials and things like that, or going, and we had an amazing homeschool community as well. There was over 100 families just northwest of Calgary in this community. And at the time there was like a Yahoo group. So you'd be like, hey, we're going to go to the landfill site today on a field trip. Who wants to come? We'll get a bus. And it was almost like we were not homeschooling. We were out all the time doing things. We were in the forest. We were at the museum, or, so when we moved to Fernie, there wasn't actually a very huge homeschool community here. So we ended up putting the kids into school, into kind of an alternative school. And, but then all of a sudden I had time to make pots. So it was like that, a little this, a little that.
Can you talk about getting your touch back after taking a couple years off? Was it hard?
It was hard. It was hard. Oh gosh, Ben, like the pots I made were, I guess there were some positive aspects to it. In retrospect, you can kind of see it's like, oh, well, that gave me the freedom to do this, because we just sold the farm. So we had a little bit of a cushion when we moved here. We didn't have to get full-time jobs right away and figure out what we were going to do with our career. Sebastian was guiding. He was driving snowcats at the ski hill. And I was working on the house. We renovated the house and started making pots again there's a little community studio here. But I didn't have this like huge amount of pressure. Nobody really knew who I was. So I wasn't like I wasn't in shows or anything. I just made really weird pots for a while, and I just explored, but I struggled. Like I had been in school and at North Mount Pleasant in Calgary using atmospheric kilns. So having not really invested a lot of time in working in electric, it was a hard transition, and I was trying to figure out sort of my new voice, I guess, in this different way of working and firing. And yeah, the first pots I don't know, the first pots were a bit weird, but they definitely led to what I make now. So it was joyful research, as Katrina.
That's right. And one of the nice things about stopping is that you get to reinvent what you want naturally. Like I think there's different ways artists shift. One is to continually work all the time and make a concrete decision, I'm going to start a new body of work. And then the other way to do it is to take a break for a while and come back and see what you're attracted to. And one of the things that you described, and I think I saw in your artist statement, is that you make things that reference the stuff we find in barns, which I thought was an interesting way to think about influence. So can you talk about finding metal objects or other influential surfaces and then trying to incorporate those back into the newer body of work or the post-raising kids body of work?
Yeah, so I guess that was my lifestyle. We were living on a farm, and even before that, when in high school we moved from British Columbia to Alberta, and we lived rurally, and there was all these sort of abandoned homestead sort of houses that I would just walk through the fields and walk into an old house or an old barn, and there was just evidence of a life lived maybe 100 years ago or 50, 60 years ago. Metal, tinware, little glass jars and things that I was so attracted to, all those old little implements, even farm implements, that I'd bring them home and just have them sort of sitting on my window ledge. And there was like a connection also, I hadn't really thought about this for a connection also to, I was really feeling a lot of resistance to being sucked into this role as a ranch wife. It was very hard to break out of, this is what you do. Like, at the branding, you make all the food and you're supporting your husband, you're looking after the kids while they go do this. Just looking at women maybe on the Canadian frontier back in colonial times, living there and trying to just raise a family and survive, in a house in the middle of nowhere. And these are these little relics from that story. Do you know what I mean? So I was thinking about that as well. I was thinking about these women who lived that lifestyle and how I was now in their footsteps, and how I didn't, to be honest, really want to be there. But what were their lives like? How was mine different? How is sort of the history of women changed in that capacity, and bringing those pieces in there? There was sort of like a nostalgic feeling to them because of that connection, if that makes sense.
Yeah, being connected to people you don't know is an interesting phenomenon. And I think artists, we understand that, but I understand that by going to museums and often seeing objects that I have a great affinity for, but I really don't know what the life of the person that made it was. And a lot of the historical research I do is into the people that make the stuff, you know? So
Hmm.
I can really understand like finding an object and then having your mind kind of fill out the story.
Yeah, and I actually took a class, and I think it was called Women on the Canadian Frontier. And unlike other history courses that were all sort of like this battle occurred here and this, general won this war in this date, it was all from women's journals. And it was such a personal story that was telling the history. It was like today, it was backbreaking work. I had to walk all the way down the river 5 times with buckets of water and bring them up to the house to do the laundry, try and keep, and they're living in like a soddy, they're living in a house made of sod. And there's a black and white photo, and then she's in like starched white clothing, and just like imagining that life, and through reading these very personal accounts, and then like you said, finding these objects that were tied to somebody's story that I don't know. I really loved that.
So, tinware, I know, is something that's influenced you. Can you describe for people that might not know that era of production, like what tinware is and how it was made?
Yeah, and it's something I actually really want to try and do, but it requires some large kind of expensive tools. Although I did see a man in Mexico make a beautiful bucket out of sheet metal, and he just did it on a table. So maybe I need to just like think differently about how to do it. But yeah, basically it's sheets of tin that are formed in a similar way to how I'm making slab built pottery, right? And they're sort of formed into a three-dimensional shape, and then the tin is rolled around the joins to or what's the word when you like hammer something and you
Or maybe riveted?
riveted to hold together, right? And you can make a bucket or a milk tin or a jug or yeah, you'll see a lot of tinware in the kitchen, but also in the barn, right? For milking cows and pouring oil into your tractor. And I think through Mark Ferris, because he was influenced also by tinware, you see that similarity between the forms and the way you're working. Although clay is a lot more plastic than metal, there's some similarities. And having lived in on a farm and been around all of those sort of antique tinware pieces, finding them in barns or in antique shops or in other farmhouses, it just became, yeah, quite an influence in my work.
In that way of building with tin, you're taking something hard but thin and stretching it into form, or kind of bending around things. And I see that in your pots. Like I'm thinking about the oval, well, all of them, but the oval teapots specifically. That rolled edge on the bottom of tin, like it relates so much to the foot and to the part where the kind of dome hits the oval. So can you talk about with a form like teapots, like how do you get from influence into that object?
I guess I wouldn't say that there's like a direct, like I don't look at a teapot made out of tinware and say, how can I make this out of clay? Um, Although I do in workshops I teach, I will give out an assignment for people to do that, just to try and figure out how to make this tinware form. Um, but I always loved that look of like a bucket that had a wood handle, like the combination of those things, and a kettle on the wood stove sort of idea. And I wanted to make that out of clay. But the sort of oval shape, I don't think you see that too much in tinware. That's just a shape that I really find very compelling to work with, that oval shape. And it was, there was a lot of weird teapots made before I got to the shape that I felt kind of work. And I still feel like they're evolving, actually. Yeah. And I wouldn't say that I keep going back and looking at tinware and trying to inject more of that inspiration into the work. It's sort of, I think, a little bit more nebulous. It's a little bit more like, oh, this, I'm going to make this decision, and maybe that's coming from something I saw, but it's a bit more intuitive than that.
And I also think there's times in our lives where we take in a lot of influences. And for me, that happened. I don't even know when that would be. Like the last huge image dump I put into my brain was years ago. So I feel like it takes me a long time to sift through that stuff. And I find when I talk to people, I'll ask them questions about their influences and they'll be like, well, 25 years ago, I
Yeah,
was looking
you're
at
like,
this.
how do you know that? Yeah, exactly.
But I think it's a slow evolution, like with the tin stuff, there's something about the way you handle slabs that's tin like, even though the pots themselves have evolved kind of into the, next two or three iterations. So can you talk about the evolution of the stamping, like how you think about sort of pressing into the surface and then how that affects how you build with those slabs?
Before we moved to Fernie, before the children, when I was in grad school, I was just starting to work with slabs. So before that, I was throwing pots and adding a little bit of texture through stamps, but not a ton. And then when I was in grad school, I got pregnant and I couldn't work at the wheel because the spinning made me feel nauseous with my pregnancy. So it was sort of a natural choice to say, okay, well, now I'm going to work at the table, especially with Mark Ferris being there. And Margaret Bowles also was doing quite a bit of slab work. She was the adjunct professor there. And I started making just sort of simple forms that were not heavily textured, a little bit of stamp rolling, but mostly just the form. And then it's kind of funny because when I first finished undergrad, again, you kind of go through a bit of a crisis, I think. I moved to the farm. Sebastian and I were together then as well. And I had also been working with stoneware and suddenly I've got this little electric scut kiln and how am I going to make a living doing this and where am I going to sell? What am I going to do? And I think like a lot of potters, you get like a wholesale order from a small company, like a coffee shop or a bed and breakfast. They want 12 mugs with their logo on it, right? And I could have gone the decal route or decal route, but I decided that I'd carve stamps that would make their basically their logo, their brand. And I got really quite good at it, carving these little stamps, not knowing that like 20 years later I would be still carving stamps but in a different way. But I think what's kind of interesting is that a lot of my stamps, especially if it's just like one stamp on a pot, it still has that sort of logo kind of brand feel to it. You know what I mean? So it definitely influenced what I make now. But the more repeated pattern that started maybe 6-7 years ago, and has sort of evolved over time. But more recently, I was just talking about this in Congress. When after my mom passed away, we were super close. I was feeling a lot of grief and anxiety after she died. It was a traumatic death. I had a really hard time getting back into the studio and working. And I was given this really great advice to just go in for 5 minutes a day and pick something that I don't know, it's kind of hard to make something in 5 minutes in the studio, but just make that your commitment. And I was like, well, I guess I could carve up some simple stamps. Maybe that will get me in the studio. In the first few days, I was sort of struggling. I was feeling that like, ooh, and kind of like that, what I'm feeling, what we've all felt in COVID too, right? Like that little in your stomach anxiety feeling. And then I started doing it every day. And then I made a commitment actually on Instagram to do like a stamp challenge. And suddenly I was like, what happens when I start doing it like this? And what happens when I start stamping pots? And all of a sudden it pulled me back into the studio. I didn't know at the time that it would end up changing my work, but it did somehow. My mother's passing away. I really started focusing in that time on repeating stamps and how shapes fit together and how I could cover the whole slab with texture, and then playing with a variety of different shapes and how they would fit together. And I still am finding that very, very compelling. But of course, to your question about how do you make something with a very textured stamped slab, if you look at the work, there are areas that are not textured and there are areas that are. And it's almost like the textured area becomes like a focus point, but the smooth area becomes like a counterpoint. And I really like having those two surfaces sort of contrast each other. But I would say right now I'm really focused on making mugs because, and I think it still has to do with that sort of COVID anxiety, like investing a whole day into making or multiple days into making teapots. I feel like I just don't have it in me, But mugs they're a little faster to make, and something about that it's I don't know. Do you know what I'm saying? Do you have that feeling?
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of potters are talking about that, like that not being able to either make work at all or not being able to fully like dive in the deep end of making complicated work.
Well, I think we need, or I need, instant gratification. Like sometimes we think that is a bad word, but I actually think it's not. Like the reward of seeing a finished object is important to me. And so when I'm making a run of cups, I need those little shots of accomplishment.
Right. Yeah, it's true. And I think because the surface decoration is what I'm super interested in right now, if I'm making just 3 teapots, it's only 3 combinations of stamps that I'm using, and it's taking me 2 days or whatever to make those 3 teapots. Whereas with mugs, I can have a lot of play because I'm making 12 to 20 at a time, right? So there's a lot more variation, and then from that jumping off and making another 10 or 20. So the movement is actually happening in the surface texture, not so much in the form.
How did you learn how to bend slabs without the slab looking dead? Because your sense of touch is so fresh, even though you are touching those slabs a lot, but you do it in a way that you're not mangling anything. How do you do that?
Thank you. Well, I would say that it's kind of funny because we're making these things by hand, but I would say that I'm trying to touch it as little as possible is one of the ways. I like to work with the slabs as soft as possible. I think that gives it a freshness. So as it starts to stiffen up, it loses the softness, right? I roll the clay out and then I flip it onto cement board, and the cement board absorbs moisture out of one side of the slab, which gives it a bit of stiffness, which gives it the strength to hold up, even though the rest of the slab is really soft. Those are probably the main reasons. But yeah, I try not, and that's a comment that I get a lot when I'm demonstrating is it's like you're hardly touching the slab, and I'm very conscious of where I'm touching the slab. So really paying attention to moisture content and what the slab will allow me to do at certain points in the drying process.
The cement board idea is a great idea because I often will throw a pot and dry the outside with a torch. And for that same thing, to have part of the pot be wet and part dry. And it makes everything move differently, And if we think about making, almost making is the remnant of movement, like you can see when you're stamping something that you have been there. But as you said, you're not leaving a fingerprint, you're leaving an image. So I'm just impressed with people. I was talking to another hand builder recently. It might have been Katrina about how to animate something, how to make a pot have volume while touching it, not enough to mangle the outside surface, but to have it feel like it's enlivened. So is there a thinness of slab that you find gives you a more lifelike's not right, because pots are not lifelike, but there are pots that I can tell that are animated, and I feel like yours have that. Like they have enough volume to feel like they're alive. So how do you get to that?
Thank you. That's lovely. Thickness of slab. I don't know if it's thickness of slab. I think when I start working larger, the slabs are a bit thicker, but I'm usually around the 1/4 inch before I start stamping. I actually think it might have come down to something. It was an interview you did with Mark Ferris, and I brought it up with you before, but he was talking about the inside hand and the outside hand. Do you remember that? And that really resonated with me in throwing. There's evidence of both the inside hand and the outside hand because both hands are pushing and pulling as you work your way up the wall of the pot. In slab building, there's often a lot of focus on the outside hand putting pressure, and that can kind of really lose the volume of a piece, and it can make it feel kind of shrunk or pinched. So I'm conscious of continually taking my hand, and even if it's not very evident, just adding that little breath of air on the inside. So there's that sense of inside hand. Yeah, and that maybe is something that you're seeing, is just being conscious of the inside volume of a pot when it's hand built.
See that in the work. And when I'm teaching people throwing, I always talk about, if you're rolling a texture onto a pot, push out from the inside, because whatever the last movement is what the pot records. So you can do all kinds of stuff to the outside, and if the last thing you do is to touch it from the inside, it will look like it's going out. Like clay is amazing in that way. Like it can record such a subtlety of movement in a way that steel or other things can't.
Yeah, and I think the other part of it might be coming back to Greg Pace was my teacher at Alberta University of the Arts and ACAD then, and his work is so much about negative space, and looking at the outside profile of the pot. That I think that's sort of this legacy of Greg Pace's negative spaces. It's like we really look at the outside shape of pots, having come through his program, and the space the between pots even. And I spent a lot of time looking at the profiles of my pots, like really looking. And even if you look on Instagram, the photos are generally the profile. They're not looking down or at a 45. They're looking at the profile. Like, I'm very interested in the space the pot occupies, which I think it also contributes to the volume of the piece, right?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up photography, because you're so good at having clarity of photo in the same way you have clarity of touch with the work. Did you have experience being a photographer? Like, how did you develop a personal sense of photographing?
I didn't take photography at all in school. It's hard to really say what made me take the photos that I did, but I think it has to do with, on Instagram, I always see a picture of someone's pot, and there would be a lot of sort of noise around the pot, sort of the chaos of life in the background. And I was having a really hard time just focusing on the pot and seeing what was happening there. And I remember thinking to myself, like, can you just hold it, straight and let me see it properly? Can you put it against a white background so I can, but not the gradient photo, not that white background photo either. I wanted there to be sort of an in-between. I wanted to be able to really see the pot, but also have a sort of a warmth. So it's usually like on a chunk of wood or something, but it's like, I want people to imagine it in their homes, but I also want people to be able to really see what's going on that pot. So I would say that's why I started taking the photos that I did. And even when I sell online, they're sort of similar in that way, right? There's not a lot going on. I oscillate between wanting my house to be like a super minimalist modernist house and the house that's just full of things, and if you came here, this part is sort of a little bit more minimalist, but over there it's there's a million pots and it's chaos and there's herbs hanging above the sink, but it's like just like trying to find that balance between the two, so it might be just like completely textured pot but a simple form, or I struggle with the balance, I guess, between that sort of modern minimalist and just all out chaos.
Well, there's a clarity to your photos and there's a clarity to the work too. And I think that is a refinement, like refining a form over time. Like you mentioned that when you first started hand building again, the forms were kind of wacky, or you didn't say wacky, I'm saying wacky. Like they were
wacky.
They were not as clear in their intent. So when you think about the forms you make things that pour, so teapots, ewers, sugar creamer, stuff like that. And then you also make a lot of handheld things like cups that pour into you. So liquid is a part of the form one way or the other, even vases behind you holding liquid. So can you talk about the influence of liquid in the forms you like to make?
That's a good question. The funny thing is, when I first started making pottery, I didn't like tea or coffee or anything that you might drink out of ceramics, traditionally. I basically just drank water back then. I drink coffee now. And I remember thinking, like, what can I make out of clay that I would use every day and would be on my, in my daily use. And the funny thing is that it was butter. It was a butter dish, which is funny because I have one of your butters. It's on our counter. We use it every day, but it is in our presence all the time. And the other thing, so ridiculous that I was like, I use every day is my toothbrush. So I was making butter dishes and toothbrush holders, like really fancy ones that were like all compartmentalized, and you could put like the toothpaste here and the toothbrush here, maybe a razor over here. But those were the things that I used every day because I wasn't drinking coffee. And then I had kids and wasn't getting any sleep and started drinking coffee. And then I became really interested in more of the liquids and the time that we spend drinking those liquids. And, I would so often find my coffee cold, and we've never had a microwave. So it would just be like a sad moment. It was like, I missed it. I missed my opportunity to drink that coffee. So I just started thinking about the liquid and the time we spend and maybe the time we take away from our busy lives to sit and drink that. And teapots especially sort of demand that you are sitting and either having a social moment, especially with a larger teapot, but a smaller teapot, you're not walking around doing laundry holding your little teapot in your mug. You're usually taking time away from something. And it's not like I can't have my computer sitting at the table with my teapot. Like, it just doesn't work very well. It's more about taking time away from the chaos of life to spend it's like almost like a few meditative minutes drinking a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. And I really like that idea. I remember reading something about Betty Woodman making these mugs that wouldn't sit on the table. Like, she was forcing you to hold on to her mug the whole time she was drinking it, to take you out of whatever the busyness of your life is, right? And I really like that idea. And actually, even through COVID, I started making more of these small, like, solo teapots, because we've all been kind of alone and feeling anxiety. How can I contribute to helping someone have a soothing moment? Maybe it is through sitting down, taking a time away from everything and drinking a cup of tea out of this little teapot. And even just like the pouring of it, like that sort of ritual of pouring it into the cup is so lovely. And then the textures on top, the feeling of them, the feeling of the bottom of the mug, really thinking almost, it sounds dumb to say, but therapeutic in some ways. Like, I feel that way when I'm using other people's work. It's like I'm exploring the cup with my hands and I'm drinking and I'm sort of contemplating, and I guess really thinking about even the vases. I would say, they do hold water, but they maybe hold one branch. They're not full of like a big, beautiful display of flowers. It's about simplicity. It's trying to pull people out of chaos, maybe.
Well, I think if you could test potters' brains, I think we're really high on the touch spectrum. Like, we're soothed by touch. And I think that we tend to make objects that we want other people to touch. And one of the things about your work that's so beautiful is that satiny glaze that's over top of the texture. It softens everything, but then it also breaks on the edge. So the texture is still like completely there. But I can just imagine holding a warm teapot and rubbing your hand across that texture. Like, that is, even thinking about that, it's like, oh, that's kind of calming.
That's great. That's the goal. Yeah.
Yeah, but how do you match surface in terms of glaze to that texture? Like, how did you get onto this satin surface?
Well, I would say so when I first started making this work, I was using a porcelain. So it's making textured slab built pots out of porcelain. And so the glazes were more about the pooling, right? The pooling into the texture, and thinking about atmospheric kilns like soda and stuff. The surfaces that I really loved were those satiny, sort of sugary surfaces. And that was why my pots were so weird, is that I was trying to make basically soda fired work in an electric kiln. But what I found really frustrating was the spaces that weren't glazed, unlike an atmospheric firing where you get like flashing and those little dots and all that stuff. It just felt sort of anemic and dead in the unglazed areas, whether it was under a pot or in the little recess where you put the lid. So then I started working in red clay, which kind of flips your positive negative of the textures that you're creating, and what you want to break through the glaze and what you want the glaze to pool in, and still focus on that sort of satiny look from back and soda firing, but also realizing that it doesn't distract from the texture. Like when there's a sheen and it's reflecting, you don't see the texture in that area, right? But if it's a more satiny glaze, the light isn't reflecting off it, so it has also kind of a calmer feel, I think, but you can see the texture around the whole pot.
Yeah, and it just dawned on me, that's part of the photography part also, is because the glazes aren't glossy, no light is coming back towards the camera, which I think is really nice. When you switch to red clay, are you cone 6? Is that what you're working at?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and with these pots, are these brushed glazes, dunk glazes? Because they look almost like completely, absolutely smooth.
They are dunked glazes. I am very particular about how I glaze. Like, I'm almost embarrassed to talk about how particular I am about my glazing. So the glazes, I use like a homemade hydrometer, like a Coke bottle with little
Nice.
lines on it. So my white glaze, I need it to, there's gravel in the Coke bottle, and there's a line that says white glaze, and when I stick it in the white glaze, it needs to go to there, so I know how much water. I also need to count very specifically how long I dunk the pot in for. It needs to go straight down and straight up, so the because drips and thicker glazing, the glazes I use are particular, so if there's a drip or something, it will show, and then it's distracting from the texture, so it has to go straight down and straight up again, so that it's just pulling straight down off the pot. And I have to hold it in there for a specific amount of time. So I can't be listening to a podcast or music, because then I get distracted and I'll be like, oh, am I at 10 or am I at 2? I don't know. So yeah, I'm but like if someone comes in, I'm glazing, you can't be in here right now. And my studio is quite social when it's not glazing day, but on glazing day, you don't want to talk to me.
Well, let's go back to this homemade hydrometer here. How much gravel do you have to put in a Coke bottle to make it the right weight to be a hydrometer?
It's a glass Coke bottle.
Okay.
And I just, this is a funny thing. This is me, like chaos versus like meticulous, like modernist, whatever. The Coke bottle is not a refined tool. It doesn't even have a top on it. Like if I knocked it over, the gravel would come out and the glass would break, and I'd have no record of what my glaze water content needs to be. But I just threw in some gravel into the glass thing, and on a day where the glaze had turned out in the kiln, I put it in there and I made a mark, and I was like, this is where I need it to be. And then I did the same thing with my other glazes. So I've got basically a line that says bone glaze, a line that says yellow glaze, a line that says pink glaze, and it's all in this Coke bottle without a lid. And a friend of mine, he came over the other day, and he was just like, so these aren't even numbers, and the lines aren't in proper increments. Like it should be a centimeter between each line. And it's like, no, it's B is for bone, and just don't even talk to me about it. That's how it works.
That is awesome. I feel like you're like a 1800 scientist trying to get like a balloon to fly off the ground or something weird, you know? You're that level of science.
Right. But I have all of the technology at my fingertips, but I'm not actually choosing to use it.
Oh, I can't give you too much of a hard time. I'd measure the slip by how it looks on my fingernail, which is like not scientific at all. But every time I teach, I'm like, no, it's got to break off your fingernail like this, because that's how you know how much is deflocculant to add.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. It's why I can't be a baker, because the chemicals are too specific. My daughter, she's like measuring the ingredients to bake, and all her things turn out amazing. But I need to be like, that sort of looks like about right, you know?
Me too. My wife is the baker. I'm the cooker. So
yeah.
I feel like with me, I'm like, let's improvise. Let's put a little cinnamon in here and, let's just do a little bit and we'll see what it turns out. And luckily, most of I have not had an absolute cooking fail in a while, which is good, because sometimes I've had stuff I'll have a dinner party and I should not improvise in those moments because people look so disappointed.
I know. Here is the fallen cake. But
Yeah.
the flavor profile is amazing, but it's not fluffy or it didn't rise or whatever.
Well, I wanted to wrap up talking about how you've cultivated an online audience for selling and how specifically you set expectations. So I'm gonna read you back to your own website to you because I thought that this was an amazing thing you wrote. You said this is under the sales section. So this is kind of like your contract for selling with people. And it says if you have an item in your cart and it doesn't mean that means it's reserved for you, someone else might have it in their cart also. If they get their payment process first, they get the pot, period. It's frustrating, I know, but all the other ways I've tried are also frustrating, period. So I'm sorry ahead of time about that. It's usually a race, one I'm super grateful for. So thank you so much for being a part of it. You are awesome. So you're essentially telling the customer like, yeah, no, people are going to buy the pots you want to buy, but I appreciate you being here and being a part of this excitement for selling. So how do you feel like a statement like that sets expectations? And does this come from like bad experiences with people being like, hey, I didn't get the pot I want?
Is that the feeling you're getting? Because that's funny. Because yes, there's sometimes people do. I understand it is probably quite frustrating when you really wanted to get something and you took time out of your day at a specific time and logged in to a website and didn't get what you wanted. And you did it multiple times, maybe 3 or 4 times, and you still haven't got something. That would be frustrating. I am coming from this place of I can't really help you, I can't change that. And I'm super grateful that you're showing up and trying, but I'm a one-person show. And I think the reason that you like my work is because I am making the work. I don't have a factory of people making it for me. And so I'm going to stay committed to that. And I'm going to stay committed to my lifestyle and not going to take orders because that just kind of sucks the energy out of the work. And also, I ended up with maybe a 2-year wait list, and it's like 2 years from now, I might not be making, I hope I won't be making the same work, right? So why would I take an order to do that? So to keep it fresh, I have had some snarky, angry folks leave comments on Instagram and emails and how can I get around this kind of thing. So I felt like I needed to put a statement up front so people understood coming in this was what was going to happen.
It was the way you wrote the statement that was so kind. You started with the kind of bad news or the reality, like, yes, it's difficult to buy these pots. But then you ended with gratitude, and then you thanked the person, and then you said, you're awesome. And I just thought, like, this is capitalism does not work on human emotion. And I thought there was something interesting about a potter that has so much demand for the work that people really want it, but you're like reassuring them like, yeah, I know this is hard. So I think there's a lesson in that, because this is exactly the same thing that happens when you go to any store and the color of tennis shoe you want. Like I remember as a kid, I would try to go buy tennis shoes with my mom, and I would always end up with white tennis shoes because no one else wanted white tennis shoes. And so that's what I got.
Right.
So there's just some reality there.
There's some reality there. I really wanted to put it out there how grateful I am. Like if it wasn't for the folks showing up to buy the work, whether they're getting it or not, I wouldn't have this career. I wouldn't be able to continue doing what I do. And I need them, and I want them to know they're appreciated. So it's not evident when you're on the website and your pot gets sucked out of your cart and you're just sitting there frustrated. So I just wanted to upfront tell them that, yeah, I think you're awesome.
We all need that pat on the back. So it's good you're giving it to them.
Is it kind of a Canadian thing? Like, I'm sorry.
God, I didn't even think about it like that, but it is so Canadian to do that.
Yeah, well, I'm a proud Canadian.
Well, to wrap up, can you plug the upcoming shows you have and also your website so people could keep in touch, or Instagram, however you want people to get in touch with you?
Well, my website, sarahpikepottery.com, and my Instagram is also Sarah Pike Pottery. And I think I'm going to have an online sale in the next couple of weeks. So if this is coming out in a couple of weeks, I may have already had it. And then my next event after that is the Clay to Table, which is happening beginning of September.
We figured it out. It's around Labor Day. Whatever Labor Day weekend is, that's when Clay to Table is happening, which will be an online sale. The portion of it will be an online sale. And I believe maybe workshops attached to that, you said?
I think there's like a bunch of things going on that weekend. It's like an event. The online sale, each of the artists who are involved in the sale or in the event will have online sales on their own websites that weekend, but there will be other things happening as well throughout the weekend.
Well, thanks for taking the time to do this. It was good to see you again.
It was good to see you too. Thanks for inviting me.
I'd like to thank Sarah for taking the time to do this interview. It was a pleasure to catch up with her. I have not seen her in person in quite a few years, so nice to see her across the digital landscape via Zoom. If you'd like to check out the photographs that we mentioned in today's interview, you can do that on her Instagram account under Sarah Pike Pottery. Also wanted to give one more plug for today's Amico Community Corkboard, which is in support of Kent McLaughlin. There is a GoFundMe campaign that's been set up to help him pay the medical expenses from a recent cancer diagnosis. If you'd like to help support he and his wife, Susie Lindsay, you can do that by going to GoFundMe.com and search for Kent McLaughlin. I'll be back next week with another episode. Thank you guys for tuning in. If you'd like more information on the artists on the show, or if you'd like more information about the workshops and events that I'll be having in the next couple months, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook under Carter Pottery. Another great way to support the show is to leave me a comment on iTunes. To do that, search Tales of a Red Clay Rambler under iTunes Podcasts, and you'll find a page that's linked to our show. Thank you guys for the support.